Hello traders and welcome back to another market update. My name is Nick, and in today's video we're going to take a look at the currency market and see what is going on from a technical perspective and see if there's any major trade setups or ideas that might catch our eye. So let's take a look here at EURUSD, which you can see is falling and continuing to respect the area that we've recently been talking about, which is this multiple top here. You can see that price has been respecting this area as a resistance for quite some time and actually is starting to show some further bearishness off of that rejection. Now there are some levels short term that I have in mind as potential barriers for sellers, such as this area here. You can see there also is quite a bit of structure here, and here, right? So you also kind of have this chitter chatter area as well. But for the most part, I'm expecting to see some sort of bullish reaction here. But then longer term, my bias remains that we could see a break underneath that structure and continue down to levels like this, as well as levels like this, as we are in the context of a longer term downtrend, very strong pressure to the downside, both technically and fundamentally here on EURUSD. That's remaining my bias here is short on EURUSD. I think we also could head back to test this trend line. This seems like a pretty reasonable pullback zone, at least for starters. Even if buyers are to continue to hold, I think it's a pretty good chance we see price make its way down to that trend line somewhere here in the future relatively soon. GBPUSD is the next one, which has continued to sell off very, very strongly. You can see here on the weekly that if we take a look, you can see that this area here did actually in fact hold very nicely as a resistance point, right? So price came up into this area, sold off recently, and then just more recently we saw price hold this area and actually sell off very strongly. Now one thing to note here is that this is kind of looking semi like a bearish engulfing candle. You can see although the wick is taller on the green bar, for the most part the price here in terms of the bodies has mostly been engulfed by this red candle. This might show some further rejection to come here on GBPUSD. Now you may ask, well, where could we see prices headed? Well, the first stop has already kind of been close right here at the right around the 1.30 level, which we have already hit and are currently trading right around. Now my bias here is that I think we could see some sort of a bounce as we are starting to see, but I think that still there could be further downside to come here. Now we are currently sitting right around the 38.2% retracement, if I remember correctly. There it is, right? We're holding right around the 38.2% retracement. I think that we could come down to places like the 50 and even, maybe if this level gets broken, head to the 61.8. But my bias remains that this area here could hold as a short-term bounce zone, and we could see a buyer step in to push price somewhere off of that structure. Let's go ahead and move on to the very next pair, which is going to be USDJPY here. You can see kind of an interesting pair, relatively choppy lately. You can see on the weekly chart, we are at a level of resistance that may be interesting to watch. We've been holding this kind of area for quite some time, right around this recent top. If we can get some sort of convincing push to the upside and a pullback, there might be the signs that we are continuing this upward move. You could also make the case that there is kind of this upward channel or upward trend line going on that we could see continue to play out for the time being. My bias here is going to remain, respecting this short-term trend, but also remembering that longer term, we have a significant structure level. You can see right here, as we've drawn recently in these market updates, we've talked about this level here. So for the time being, respecting the longer term sell pressure in this area is going to be my bias. But also remember that we do have this kind of upward channel. And so if price decides to break out, if we see a change in nature of this market, we could see the continuation of this trend that is a counter trend currently become the dominant trend there on USDJPY. But again, remaining bearish as the longer term trend here has pretty good downward structure there. So XAUUSD is our next one here. You can see on this pair, we still have also some bearish structure, right? We also have some bullish structure along the bottom here. And what you have is you kind of have a market that is ranging back and forth between these two levels. And my idea is that I think we could come down from these structures. And one of my longer term targets that I've talked about here on the market updates is I think that we could be headed back to the 200 period SMA. So if I get my 200 period simple moving average here, you can see if I just plug that in, you can see that's kind of a longer term target to me, is a price movement back to retest that longer term indicator that I watch personally as just a long term filter, right? So a longer term directional bias is telling me that the market has a bias towards the upward movement. However, I'm waiting to see that markets can retest that area to maybe find continued support and maybe even break through this downward channel that we do see here on XAU GBPUSD. Brent crude is our next one here, which continues for the most part to hold this channel. However, we are seeing kind of an interesting thing happen. You can see if we draw in our levels here on the channel, we are hugging the top of this range, but it looks like we have some bearishness coming into the market. The question will be, can we roll over and start to actually get back down towards structure there on the bottom? WTI crude, very similar. I'm sure you can see here a little bit stretched to the upside at this point. And if we draw this trend line like this, you can see we are even kind of breaking above that structure. And if we do continue to see the break of that structure, we could see something like a spike and a continuation even outside of the structure. But at some point here, I think WTI crude rolls over. My bias would be that we see some sort of rollover on the oil market here, especially as we come into this top area and look a bit stretched to the upside. Next up is EURGBP. Speaking of GBP pairs, which have been moving quite a bit, I think we could be headed back to this level that we continue to talk about here on the market updates, which is kind of just a healthy pullback area. If we also draw a fib, let's see if that lines up anywhere with that level. You can see we draw from high to low. Yeah, that 38.2% retracement area looks kind of interesting. We also have the 50% touching structure, which might also be something to consider. But I think that in terms of a pullback, this area looks like kind of a sweet spot to find at least some sell pressure or some continued sign of sellers in this market. GBPJPY is our last one, which did completely fill the gap that was printed here, and you can see price filling down and now even coming lower underneath that gap. Where are we headed with this pair? Well, I think if we draw the fibs, we might get an idea of where price could be headed, right? I like that 38.2% retracement for a potential short-term bounce, but other than that, this market has been stretched quite a bit to the upside, so it's not out of the question if we see a further retracement. I think even the 50% is probably a fair pullback area. Guys, thank you so much for watching the market update. I hope that you got something out of it. We'll see you next time.